Okay, y'all. So I said that I was not going to do any name calling during this review, as hard as it may be, and honestly, I did enough of that on Twitter. We are here to talk about the latest episode of The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. I look a mess. I washed my hair today. I cleaned my house. But we are here. So, we're coming off of last episode when the whole thing was happening with Todd and trying to kick Lisa and John out. So we pick up with John going to talk to Lisa about this whole thing. And essentially John is, and I'm appreciating seeing this because we don't see much of this, but John is being the voice of reason. And he's like, you really just need to go talk to BRONWYN with nobody around. And Lisa does say, she feels like she and BRONWYN are going to be fine. She doesn't really say anything about Angie. I wouldn't make up with either one of y'all if you're asking me. But anywho, she feels like the link between that, what's the language? The common denominator is Whitney. I think there's truth to that as well. Whitney is obviously a mess, and Whitney, as I already said, intentionally says inflammatory things, and she escalates things. So you can tell that she kind of gets in there and digs, but we'll get more into that this episode because of course she does this episode. So despite what John said, because I'm pretty sure this is not what he meant, but Lisa brings up the conversation to BRONWYN while they're all at lunch. And granted, they are sitting across from each other and it seems like it's a long table. I'm not trying to give a defense to Lisa. This is just literally me thinking about it. And when they film, it does kind of seem like it's different conversations going on. So anywho, I still don't think this is the right time. But they're having a conversation. It does seem like it's going to be somewhat productive. And Lisa's getting to her explanation of, hey, I just didn't feel like there was an opportunity where I needed to defend you with Heather because Heather was more so just talking about her feelings. And that's all I was trying to convey to you. And I think that was a good starting point. I think that BRONWYN was listening and she was receptive to that. And they're going to get back into it later. But then, Lisa obviously, which I don't think she should have done this either. She's like, when people are lying about me, and she gestures toward, Whitney, and Whitney down there having her own conversation, then it's, I'll give her the word forced to jump into this conversation and defend herself. But what I just didn't live for, and I'm just never going to live for, is, Justin eventually jumps in, and he starts having this back and forth with Lisa, and I'm not one of those people where it's like men cannot have issues with women. I understand that that's going to happen because we're all people, but obviously I just don't agree with like a man disrespecting a woman or like coming at her aggressively. Now, I will say in this conversation, I can't necessarily say he's being aggressive in this conversation, but I think it lingers from what happened at the party, at Angie's party. Like, after I've seen you be aggressive with her once, I kind of just don't want to see you talking to her at all. And it's just so nice. John didn't jump in this time, but Lisa was handling herself, I guess, and she was kind of like, whatever, Justin, like, fine, because clearly he's not coming off of this thing. But he does clock, and I was, like, screaming over this when I saw the clip before the episode even came out. He does clock, like, there's always an issue with Lisa. Like, whose turn is it going to be to yell at Lisa next? Like, she coughs, and people want to yell at her. And that's the truth. That doesn't mean, two things can be true. So let me break this down. Like, obviously, people like Angie and like BRONWYN don't understand things like that. Two things can be true. So it is true that people really kind of pick at Lisa and make it such a big deal every time she does something just because they're annoyed by her. And typically when you're annoyed by somebody, you kind of like everything they does annoys you. And you want to pick at it and you want to argue. That's what happens in this group. It's been happening since season 1, Clock That Tea. But also it can be true that sometimes Lisa is in the wrong. She is. But in this instance, I haven't connected the dots this season. So John does jump in and does the right thing and kind of gets to the root of the thing with Whitney and Lisa. And I think it's worth explaining to Whitney so that she can stop doing the same thing. But I can understand that this isn't the right time to do it because things are heated. Like, I don't know if I'll give her necessarily a note, but let me give her a helpful tip. So it's like, hey sis, like, how about you ask a question? Like, actually ask Lisa, had she done this? Because Whitney in her delusional brain is making it seem as though all I did was come to you and, try to clarify if you started this rumor about me or whatever the hell. But actually, which I said already, she accused Lisa, which is what made Lisa go off. Don't justify Lisa going off. I think Lisa should kind of calm down. But yeah, girl, like, you came at her and you accused her. That was the tone of the conversation. So John very helpfully gives her a tip. He says, just ask her. Like, ask her, did she do it? Obviously, she says no. And John's like, okay, fine. Leave it there. It is what it is. But then, something I just did not see coming, because I was like really at his defense last season, Sean jumps in and he's like, well, wait. I don't remember the context. But he's like, well, wait, Angie, didn't she tell you? And I don't remember what he said. Because I was too busy wondering, they're sitting here solving something. And it's Lisa and Whitney, right? Like, obviously, it's not going to be the biggest placeholder, but it's getting resolved to a point where they can speak amicably. And you're inciting more issues with Lisa. Just, well, let me ask. Like John says, for what reason? And then I have an answer. Just because. So he takes this opportunity, he being Sean, takes this opportunity to say, he's witnessed Lisa in instances with Angie, and he feels like Lisa's very mean to Angie. And at this point, I'm just very confused. Like, why are you even talking to me? And like, why are you speaking for Angie? Like, you're doing the same thing Justin's doing. Like, everybody's like, okay, well, they're sticking up for their wives. Da, 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 da. That's another thing too. That's fine. But like, you're actually actively speaking on women's business. Like, this isn't an interpretation. Like, that's what's happening. You're speaking on instances between Lisa and Angie, and you're giving your piece on. Don't give me. Why are you talking to her about it? Talk to your wife, and then your wife can come talk to me if she has an issue with me. So I can understand, because I already know the think piece girlies are going to be like, well, if you say, if I did something to you, not an apology. What she said to Angie is, if you feel like I've been mean to you, or whatever the hell she said, I'm paraphrasing, but the word if was there. She says, if I've made you feel that way, then I apologize. Because, yeah, Angie hasn't said anything. Angie hasn't expressed that. This is new to Lisa. So, yeah, if you feel that way while your husband is speaking for you, I almost called him a name, then I apologize. Boom. So after that, set the parlays into them going to play volleyball. A lot about this episode to me was almost filler-ish, but I struggle to say the word filler because I use that word as meaning like they intentionally did it, but I don't think they were intentionally filling the episode because they did have things, but for whatever reason, they included a lot that I feel like we didn't need. So we get a weird check-in with Mary. I guess for the sake of story, but she goes into her son's room and it's not cleaned up, and he's sitting in the bed under the covers with his girlfriend or whoever she is, and they're eating, and she's having a conversation with him, more so kind of like on the side of her, and basically directing our conversation to him and saying, you gotta get up and go do something with your life. And we get this confessional about her saying, he lacks motivation and she doesn't know what happened, and she blames herself because she spoiled him. I get it. I think I understood it the first two times that she said it. This one was more in depth, and it's obviously an exchange between them, so it's more interesting. But I feel like we can get to the point now. So now John is asking Lisa if she feels better about things, and to my surprise, maybe she's delusional too. She feels better about the whole BRONWYN thing. Again, she doesn't really touch on Angie at this point, and she just says like she feels like she and BRONWYN can move forward. And I understand. I didn't grasp that much of it, but like I said, I do feel like they had a good start to a conversation. So maybe that's what she's referencing. She does acknowledge like the issue does keep changing with Angie and her husband. Like, it's kind of weird, but like it's not like they just have animosity towards you, and so everything you do is going to bother them. Like, it just is. So she even highlights, like, in her surprise as it pertains to Shawn specifically, like Meredith had just told her about her weird instance with Shawn, and she had some adverse opinions about it. And even Lisa said, well, that's not my experience. What everybody keeps begging Lisa to do, she did it. She's like, that's not my experience with Shawn. And she said she's never seen that side of him until this lunch. And they cut to Whitney and Justin, and she is saying, like, I don't know about things with me and Lisa. She hasn't spoken with me since lunch. And it's like, why would she speak to you? Why, Whitney? Like, this doesn't even make any sense. But, she says I think she said she was still open to, well, Justin was asking, like, can you guys move forward? And she was saying, like, well, I don't know if I can trust Lisa. And it's like, but you're the one. Okay. I truly don't understand why BRONWYN thinks Lisa owes her an apology. I don't. I think that Lisa can apologize to BRONWYN for calling Heather and how that made BRONWYN feel. But outside of that, because I know that's not what BRONWYN's asking for. So outside of that, and I don't remember. I think like this is where I kind of started to get some filler. But they do a confessional, I believe it was, and Meredith does clock like she feels like there's a weird tension between Bronwyn and Todd. Oh yeah, I think this because this is at the point where they're like giving their speeches about the trip, and she threw a lot of I don't want to use the word jab, but she said a lot of like sarcastic jokes about why she was with Todd. And typically you would expect maybe one or two, but they were about four. So I was like, okay. And you know, like I said, Meredith clocks that they have a weird dynamic. And at the end of the day, like all I'm seeing is that Todd doesn't want to be there. And I believe that that's probably frustrating Bronwyn because she's already having conflict with her friends. And then she should be able to go to her husband and like, you know, vent to him and things like that on top of the fact that it's their anniversary trip. So him not wanting to be there and not necessarily participating and not being a personable guy, I'm sure is frustrating her, so I'm sure it's very upsetting. And so it must be causing some type of tension. So Angie brings out the newlywed game. I didn't expect this to go well. I thought it would maybe, I guess it did bring out something. It didn't bring out it didn't bring out what I thought it would bring out. And not that I knew what it would bring out, but I thought it would be something different. They get to the question of, which I don't even know. I thought the question was, because the newlywed game is you're supposed to know things about your partner and the answers are supposed to match. So I thought that the question posed was, who is your partner's, I'm pretty sure it was, who is your partner's least favorite person at this table? But then people started raising their own. I guess maybe because Lisa started that. So Lisa raised her board and she said Whitney. So it seems like people started raising their board to say who their individual least favorite was. Only big notables to me, which is what kind of kicked off what I wasn't expecting, was SHAWN naming Meredith, Bronwyn, and what's his name, Justin naming Lisa. And even Whitney, I think Whitney named Meredith. And I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but I'm just going to say if Whitney really had that deep of a problem, let's dissect this because now I want to dig. Can you imagine your wife has a conflict with another woman, and now you have placed yourself by ways and means that we'll discuss with the assistance of Lisa. You have placed yourself into this beef. It has taken on its own life where you have your own individual as a man dislike for your wife's friend. To the point that you're playing a game and they say, now who's your least favorite in the group? And your wife doesn't even name that woman, but you do. Imagine how weird that is. Anywho, so Whitney then asked Lisa, like, hey, do you still feel like Justin owes you an apology? I'm glad we got to it. I wish that we had more of a segue or context to it, but it could have been simply that they did the boards and she asked because they are related, but I don't know. It just was a weird segue for me. Lisa says yes. And then a weird turn of events. Now the weirdness is shifting between that couple. And Whitney doesn't even necessarily say that he didn't do anything wrong. She asked Lisa instead, well, do you feel like you were aggressive toward him? So I'm wondering, are you trying to imply that because Lisa may have been aggressive toward him, then he should have responded aggressively? And I don't even know that I have an answer for that generally. Because obviously people are people, like I've already said. So there are instances where women are aggressive towards men and they respond with the same energy. But I'll speak about this instance. Even taking the word aggressive out of it. Based on what Lisa did, Justin's reaction did not match, in my opinion. Therefore, there's no justification for it. But thankfully, he leaves Whitney on that weird-ass corner by herself, and he does say very slowly, he comes to realize, but I do think he digested it and he believes it. He said, you know, the way that I responded to you may have been stronger than it should have been. May have been stronger than it should have been. I think I said that right. And therefore, I apologize. And Lisa says, thank you. And she immediately says, I apologize for putting you in that situation, which is the exact apology that she should have given because she did put him in that situation. Not the inflammatory language of, oh, you charged at him or you were aggressive towards him, because I don't agree with that. And that sounds like a justification for how Justin responded. But she did put him in that situation because she's the one that made him feel that way and she approached him. So I thought that was perfect. And because of this, now Whitney decides, okay, I'm going to let the Alibaba stuff go. If it had been that big of a deal, like, this is your business, for real. So if this had been that big of a deal, you wouldn't be letting it go that easily. It was falling flat, so she dropped it, and she's going to pick up a new storyline. Most likely involving Lisa. Coming to what I didn't expect. So Meredith, addresses Shawn, and she says, hey, I feel some type of way about the conversation. I was, apologetic to you about, I think she also was apologizing for putting him in that situation. She felt bad that had affected him, that situation had affected him. And I think that's a proper apology. I do wince every time she says that she didn't even do anything, because I still don't know that I would agree with that. And I said that last season. I still have that same feeling. I don't necessarily agree with that. But I do think that she may take on more blame than she's supposed to. So anywho, she did apologize to him though, and I think that was good, but he obviously stood 10 toes down in his whole Brooks thing. And he goes a lot of different ways. And the first way that he went was already way too far left. He was already out of the window once all these things started. But he starts off by saying, and this is one of my pet peeves. Honestly, like the way he leaned up on the table and gave her this attitude, like he was just so right. It was disgusting to watch. And he's like, my pet peeve is that, we talked about it, I thought we squashed it that night, and now you're bringing it up again, and it's obviously not resolved. And I'm like, am I watching a conversation between two housewives? Because I've heard this conversation before, but between two housewives. And also, nothing was squashed about the conversation. She just said that to you. You guys had a conversation, she apologized, and you stood 10 toes down about something that you said about her son. That was weird. So how could you guys have resolved that? I don't understand. Then he flips it and he's like, well, tell me what I said. So she's being very clear. I'm paraphrasing. And she basically explains to him exactly what happened and how it went. And then Whitney's on the side like, well, where's the proof? Where's the proof? Being extremely irritating. So Seth has his phone and he reads the headline. And he does the whole biatch thing. On that, trying to be rational. He should not be calling women biatch or addressing to women as biatch. It's disrespectful. That's all I got. Another weird turn of event, Angie calls it clickbait because she's like, well, that's just a headline. Like, well, we don't know what it says. And she, like, there's like audio of it. So, I mean, granted, they didn't hear the audio at the table, but like, so it just, and then he changes his story up again and he's like, well, you're probably reading it out of context or listening to it out of context. If you listen to it, you probably get a different understanding. It's like, probably like, do you know what you said or do you not? And if you don't know what you said, then how can you tell me that I'm probably hearing it out of context? Why are we hypothesizing? And then he switches it again and he says, well, what I was talking about was basically you were leveraging the fact that you have connections to the LGBTQ community and therefore you couldn't have been accusing me of being gay in a negative light, is essentially what he was saying. And I think that that's a fair point. But he used her son specifically. Like the tie to the gay community that he was using was her son. And that is the same thing as saying you're basically using your son for a storyline. I don't think he should have said that. And then he jumps again and he says, but, if I had said something negative about your son, I would apologize, but I didn't. And he says, you're just victimizing yourself. So now he's being inflammatory. And it's just like, wow, this is like all over the place. Like, you can tell obviously that he knew he didn't have a leg to stand on because he keeps jumping from terrible point to terrible point. I don't remember saying anything like that, but if I did say that, again, I would apologize. I didn't say it. And then he says, but I want us to have a path forward. So at that point, I'm like, okay, so there isn't a reasonable person in that marriage. To get away from that, Angie thinks that she's talking about something light, and so she, talks to Todd because all the other husbands are except for John, being I'm not calling names, but they're being something. And she says, Todd's my fave. So Todd, like, what's going on with Gwen and the whole family thing? And they're like, that's not a positive thing. So Todd gets very like I was about to say Todd gets grumpy, but Todd's default is kind of like grumpy. So Todd breathes. So at this point, you can tell that, like, because Todd's really kind of being very pointed about, like, being negative, and Bronwyn is trying to, like, bring it down a little bit and kind of talk people through it, because obviously if we just see you reacting angrily, like, that's confusing. So we thought this was a good thing. And she's trying to be positive about it, and she's like, what Lisa did, like, she's been a big help, she's been great. And even Todd was like, it was well intentioned, like, that's the only positive thing he said at dinner. But he's still extremely upset. And while Brown was trying to, like, kind of piecemeal it to the girls, but in a kind way, and like move them past it at the same time, she's clearly not trying to have the conversation. She's clearly trying to put a pin in it, but not where it's like angry and weird and short. But he's like, we're done talking about it, like cutting her off. And she's in her confessional saying, she's embarrassed. And, well, hell yeah. But then Todd gets a confessional to be more, no names, but to be more Todd. And he says, it's nobody's business. We shouldn't be talking about this at dinner, which is a fine point. But I don't think that you have to address it in an angry way. But really what made me get off of even trying to give him a point is that he says, it wasn't even Lisa's business to share in the first place. You just said at the table that it was well-intentioned, and now you're upset again, and you're fussing in the confessional, and you say, well, it wasn't Lisa's business to bring it up. What's the side? Like, I don't get it. But when we come back from commercial, we ain't even at dinner no more. It's the next day, and Whitney's basically walking us through it and saying, even after all of the BS at dinner, they had a really good night. Personally, I feel like we could have used more of that footage. Like the montage they gave us gave me the idea they were drunk, they got along, everybody was pretty cool. But I think it would have been more interesting to get a little bit more of that, but fine. And it makes this next point even worse because then they go to this like racing event, and I'm not even understanding why we needed to see that, because when we get there, the big thing, the only thing, is that Bronwyn and Lisa are going to have a conversation, but then they can't because it's too loud, so they decided to have it at the house. And then we go back to commercial, and we come back from commercial, and we're back at the house. So I don't understand that waste of time. We're now getting a scene with the world's worst couples. It's Justin and Whitney and Angie and SHAWN. And this is like Whitney and them came out after Seth came out to say goodbye. And I thought it was nice and interesting at the same time that Seth was come say goodbye to somebody like SHAWN. But he did. But when he leaves, they then, proceed to talk mess about Seth. And Justin even like made a dig at Seth in his confessional about Seth not being around. They start doing that thing where they're like, oh, there must be bigger issues between Seth and Meredith. And it's just like, I thought that Whitney was bad, right? But to see that she's married to a man that acts just as bad as her, and then Angie, she has her faults, but I truly think Angie's biggest issue is that she is like up in the clouds. But to see that she's married to a man that's just so petty like that, oh God. And this is what I'm talking about when I say Whitney gets in there and really just tries to inflame things, because now she's trying to relate to SHAWN, and she's like, yeah, even with Meredith, like, because they shift to Meredith, and they're like, even with Meredith, like, you and her made up, right? And then she comes back and she has an issue. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Girl, you weren't even there. Like, you don't even know what you're talking about. So at the very end, finally, we're getting this conversation with Bronwyn and Lisa, and they do acknowledge that they had come to some understanding on the first step of that conversation. Like, they saw eye to eye on that. So great. I think that's, like I said, a great starting point. So now we can move on to step 2. And they are now really talking about the meat of it, which I can appreciate because they've kind of got the BS out of the way. Like, they got that stick up for me thing out of the way. And they can specifically talk about the fact that, Bronwyn was upset because Heather essentially said that she was vicious and said that she was trouble and basically said that she was two-faced. And those things deeply hurt Bronwyn. Bronwyn, I think, described them as mean. And so she was crying when Heather left. How would Lisa have known that? This is the first time you told her. So, but anywho. So she's basically saying her issue with Lisa is that Lisa didn't say, like, well, I don't know Bronwyn to be that person. Essentially say that Bronwyn is not mean and vicious and that Bronwyn is not two-faced. And before this conversation can even, like, fully come out, I'm thinking to myself, and this is not even off any bias, energy, funny, kiki cackle. Genuinely, Bronwyn is a mess. Like, she genuinely is Two-Faced. And the evidence is in this season. Like, it was at the beginning of the season, which I keep harping on, and everybody keeps acting like it didn't happen. And this is the rooter to the tutor of the issues of the Bronwyn and the Lisa issues. So I don't know why we keep acting like it's not there. But anywho, I'll remind you, Bronwyn went to that girl Mei Lee and told her that Lisa was talking about the way that she dressed. Simply because Heather got into it with Bronwyn at that lunch or dinner or whatever it was, and Lisa didn't come to her defense there. This is at the beginning of the season. When you just came in with your friend and you had a simple disagreement with your friend, she didn't stick up for you. So it's like, oh, well, let me go tell a complete stranger that my friend was talking about her so I can get back at her. And you admitted that. She admitted that she did that to be messy. She admitted it. That's Two-Faced. So, yeah. And then, to my surprise, Lisa comes to her confessional and she's like, well, I can't really give Bronwyn what she wants because I do think that she's Two-Faced sometimes. And I'm like, thank you. And honestly, I wish that she would just get it out and tell her. This probably isn't the time because Bronwyn is clearly very upset. She keeps throwing things back and forth and just talking. Y'all will give that to Lisa, but y'all won't give it to Bronwyn. Clock that T. But she's all over the place. She's spiraling. So it's probably not the time, but Lisa does need to explain to her, like, hey, you did this. It was weird. It was a little Two-Faced to me. So I don't necessarily disagree with Heather that you're Two-Faced. It's all love, though. Like, it can be a simple conversation. And honestly, I think it hurts Bronwyn that much more because she knows that she's been Two-Faced. And she knows that she can be a bit of a mess. She knows that. I think that that's an insecurity of hers. So when somebody has clocked it, it hurt her. And now she's, using her fragility and she's crying over it because somebody's clocked her tea. But she wants her friend to come say, like, well, no, I don't know her to be that way. Because it's my first season on TV and I'm coming off as a mess. And I don't want nobody to think that, so my friend needs to stick up for me. No, forget that. Like, girl, it'd be different if you hadn't done it to Lisa. You did it to her this season. Like, you want her to stick up for you? That's crazy. And finally, at the end, everybody's leaving. Thank God, child. And Todd had got them flights home. And, Lisa is having a fit because they have to fly coach. She says she don't carry coach and she don't fly coach. Hasn't flown coach since college. It must be nice. And, we know this about Lisa. I find it endearing. I love it. I think it's funny as hell. However, I can understand how that can be annoying. And I definitely can see how it can be inconsiderate because Todd did buy these flights. But I'm also going to clock, two things can be true. I'm also going to clock that they arrived on the jet and they're leaving in coach. So I do think that that's a factor. But also, I understand that the flight is only 2 minutes long. And somebody bought that flight for you, and Lisa is being a mess about it. But then I also understand, now 3 things are true, that Bronwyn's going to blow this up and make it a huge deal that it's not. Because honestly, as Bronwyn is concerned, I can understand being upset about it. But, she drags it and really makes it an issue. I feel like that's going to tell me a lot. Y'all know how I feel. My opinion has not changed. I see some of the girls coming around and noticing things about Bronwyn, definitely about Todd. But, y'all know how I feel. And I enjoyed the episode.